Chief Futurist at Futurist.com, researcher, keynote speaker, author of Facing Our Futures, Nikolas Badminton, joining us on Canada Now. Sorry, I cut my mic off for some reason. Nick, that was me. Nick, we got to talk about e-bikes. We got to talk about e-bikes because they are replacing thousands of cars in Denver, an estimated 100,000 vehicle miles per week, in fact. I mean, it's crazy just how popular e-bikes have gotten in some places, notably in Denver.
Yeah, it's incredible. If you go to the Metro Denver area, I mean, it's big and sprawling, lots of different neighborhoods, and clearly this has been a program that's been wildly successful, and this is one of the biggest trends that I talk about in terms of mobility, is the idea of micromobility, the fact that we're not jumping in cars, that we still want personal transportation, but that personal transportation can be things like e-bikes and e-scooters and things like that.
Yeah, well, the pandemic no doubt has helped in sales of e-bikes, but it's being considered by some as the fastest selling electric vehicle in the U.S. They only entered the market like 5 years ago. So, I mean, this is beyond a trend now.
Yeah, and if you think about it, and I noticed this certainly over the last 3 years, obviously at-home food delivery services have sort of risen, but I would say, and you can use that technology, and it's incredibly cheap, and you can use that technology, and it's incredibly cheap, and you can go further, and you can really stay on top of things. I actually think that this is a really exciting new sort of development with regards to mobility, especially in cities.
Yeah, well, cash incentives were offered in Denver towards the purchase of e-bikes. Over a weekend, over 1,000 applicants had applied to their incentive program. In the end, 4,700 vouchers were given out, and after $300,000 was set aside for the program, Nick, they had to cobble together $5 million to accommodate all the applicants.
That's incredible. I mean, like, here's the thing. If you want to make a change, you've got to incentivize that change. It's not just going to happen on goodwill. And a lot of people that really want to get on board just do not have the funds available. So incentives have to be core to making behavioral change actually happen, right? Yeah. As we've still got this unbalance, and you're going to have people going out and buying cheap cars, or struggling on public transportation and whatever. This is really heartening. It's also, there's some parallels as well with what's been happening in Norway, where 80% of new vehicles in Norway sold are actually electric vehicles, right? There's lots of incentives, and it's not just incentives in terms of, like, tax breaks on buying a vehicle. It's like, car parking is cheaper, or it's free to use the ferry if you've got an electric vehicle, or a whole number of things, right? The money is a motivator, and it's probably the key motivator for change in the world, even today. I mean, we all like to think that, the goodness in our hearts is going to change the world. But money walks, right?
Well, what about the goodness in our hearts in terms of incentives like climate change? Seeing what's going on in the world, certainly we're being reminded of it in various parts of Canada, the effects of climate change, seeing wildfires in Nova Scotia. Now, we're not talking Alberta, BC. Right. We're talking about Nova Scotia. How much has that, I mean, like in Norway, how much has that been an incentive where they may have gotten on board with, hey, we got to go green and we've got to do what we can to curb climate change?
Again, like, the specter of a terrible situation doesn't come and hit us until we're living right in the middle of it. And then we still feel useless to be able to affect change. When I bought my first electric car, 100% electric, like 6 years ago, 5 years ago or so, I did it because there were incentives. for scrapping my internal combustion engine car. It was a 20-year-old Subaru. And the incentives of, like, what British Columbia, where I was living at the time, actually afforded me, right?
Yeah.
So would I have made that choice otherwise? Well, the technology is more expensive and whatever. E-bikes are very expensive versus normal bikes, right?
Yes.
And we've forgotten that, people don't want the effort of doing like 40, 50 kilometers a day just cycling around, because that's pretty tough in this day and age, especially in adverse weather conditions, right? So yeah, the money is the motivator, and the thing that like drives change makes sense to me, right? Why don't we take some of those fossil fuel subsidies and subsidize this kind of transportation, right?
Well, yeah, and maybe that is being done in Canada because our federal government does not offer incentives for e-bikes, but some provinces do. E-bike buyers in Nova Scotia can get a rebate of up to $500, while residents in Yukon receive a rebate equal to 25% of the purchase price, capped at $750 for e-bikes and $1,500 for e-cargo bikes. In
Right.
BC, the government recently announced that rebates will be available to residents older than 19 starting today. In fact, rebates are based on a person's income and range from $350 to $1,400. The Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure says it is investing more than $6 million in the rebate program, which will help up to 9,000 British Columbians lower the cost of their e-bike. So this is a movement that's gathering steam, and maybe a new chapter of that starting today.
Yeah, I'd love to see more of it all over the city. I mean, we both live in Toronto. Wouldn't it be great if the streets were filled with normal bicycles and e-bikes more than there were cars?
Yeah.
Can you imagine the mobility and the quickness to get around the city, right? It'd be amazing.
Yeah, and we'd be healthier. Do you envision a time, because we've, to varying degrees, seen it in other places in the world, are we going to see a North American city really go all in on bikes? I mean, we got an old city like Toronto, and
Right.
we talk about, like, oh, I remember in the beginning of the pandemic where it's like, all right, well, maybe we're not going to be taking public transportation as much, so we're going to walk more. We're going to want to be outside. This is all a reminder of us wanting to be outside. So we were talking about bigger sidewalks. Are they going to be able to do that with an old city like this? It's hard to get around as it is with cars. Streets are smaller. Do you see a city like Toronto, an old city like Toronto, saying, all right, we've got to rejig this whole city. We got to figure out what we're doing here so we could get moving on bikes. Go all in on that.
The city's growing, right? And a lot of the new places that are being built aren't being built with the amount of car parking spaces that are needed. And I think that that's a really, really good thing. Me and my partner, we talk about that, and it's like, well, it's not the city's responsibility to find you a parking spot. And so, there are these tensions that are going to start pushing people in this direction.
Yeah.
But then we have to say, where's the infrastructure for these e-bikes at the same time, right? You can't just like remove one thing without providing an ability for charging, parking, and the such like on the other side. You go to places like Europe, and you go to places like Holland and Amsterdam and whatever. The place is built around bicycles, and people on bikes are given precedence, and there's a cultural change that has to come.
Yeah.
The amount of conversations you have with taxi drivers, Uber drivers that hate bike lanes.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on, I ride bikes. This is this is the situation. Like, let's not try and create sides to the argument. Let's try and all work out how we can make a better world for everyone and be accepting.
Yeah, there really is a bitterness in the city, isn't there? Driver versus
all
cyclist.
cities, all cities in Canada, and a lot of cities in North America as a whole. And it's probably driven by a whole bunch of messaging that's pushed out through various channels and lobbied by probably the fossil fuel industry.
I'd love to try an e-bike. I've never been on an e-bike. Have you been on one?
It's awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. I did it with a bunch of my friends in Whistler, BC, around all the trails. Yeah. It's a lot of fun because it's not like you're not putting in effort. It's just that the effort you put in like yields greater rewards.
Yes, it sustains itself for a while, right?
Yeah, so you can go as fast as the amount of watts that you output on the road, can be that of a professional cyclist, even though you're someone like me or you. Right?
Chief Futurist at Futurist.com, researcher, keynote speaker, author of Facing Our Futures, Nikolas Badminton. Nick, appreciate it, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jef. I'll speak to you soon.
All right, pal. Looking forward to it. There is Futurist Nick Badminton.